Hello and welcome to our webinar introducing TrendTracker, a new data analysis module for our Bluehill Central lab management software. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Nick Erickson, your host for this webinar. Today I'm joined by Dan Caesar, the product manager for all of Instron's static testing software. This includes Bluehill Universal, Bluehill Central, and any additional modules like TrendTracker that you'll be learning about today. We expect the presentation should take around 40 minutes. If you have any questions, please submit these at any time using the questions pane in GoToWebinar. We'll aim to address these before we wrap up at the end of the hour. I also want to mention that we are recording this session. All of you will receive an email after the session with a link to the video, and it will also be available on our website, instron.com. So with that said, I'll turn things over to Dan to get us started.
All right, thank you, Nick. And welcome everyone. Thanks for joining in today. So whether it's the morning, afternoon, maybe you're listening to this on a recorded session on YouTube, but just thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen in and potentially learn about this product that might have some positive benefits for you. So I just wanted to start with an agenda today, and of course we are going to be introducing TrendTracker, so we want to start off with exactly what it is, what its core functions are, and then get into really what value it has. Why do people use TrendTracker? How does it help them in their day-to-day operations? Then we'll be jumping into a live demo of the product and how it's not only integrated into Bluehill Central, but how it's integrated with our testing software, Bluehill Universal. And then I'll jump out of the live demo and just do an overview of Bluehill Central, which is a very new application for Instron that we've just released towards the end of this past year. So I wanted to give a high-level overview of that product, and then as time allows, hopefully we'll have 15-20 minutes to go through some questions. As Nick said, there were some questions submitted during registration that I'll definitely be able to get to. And then as I'm going throughout today, feel free, submit things so that towards the end of the session, I can address anything that might come up from today's presentation. But hopefully that sounds good and we can get started. So really, what is the TrendTracker module? That TrendTracker is an optional module in Instron's latest lab management software, Bluehill Central. So its core function is really to store test results from your Instron frames, allowing you to evaluate the performance of your products over time. So in a manufacturing setting, that this is commonly referred to as statistical process control or SPC. But at the end of the day, we're evaluating the performance of your products over time based off of specifications and other common statistical tools for analyzing your process control. And this multi-sample analysis capability, it cannot be performed in Bluehill Universal testing software that is running the Instron system. So if you are familiar with our Bluehill testing software, that when you open up a sample, when you're testing specimens, that you're limited to viewing that active sample. So the results or statistics of that single batch of specimens is what you're able to view at any given time. So before getting into all of the details, that it is important to note that while TrendTracker has just been released as a module within Bluehill Central, that Instron has offered TrendTracker in its own standalone application since 2013. So it's been around for over a decade. It used to be a standalone offering, but in terms of the core functionality of taking your Instron test results, sending them to be viewed in a separate viewer, that this is not new, but everything that we're going through today is showing how it's of course, refreshing everyone who's not familiar with what the functions are and showing you how it's integrated into our new application, Bluehill Central. So you'll notice that if you are familiar with TrendTracker, what we'd call the legacy viewer application at this point in time, because it's no longer going to be offered, that you will find very similar functionality, but you'll notice a refreshed look with the TrendTracker module in Bluehill Central, and then just some added benefits of actually being integrated with Bluehill Central. So for those who are not familiar, beyond just that core function of multi-sample data analysis, that we do this and we can view test results from multiple samples produced on one or more Instron systems by creating customizable queries to find the data that you care about for a given analysis. So those queries, or searches that we like to call them, they let you define criteria based on any available test parameter. So that could be things like the test method's name, or maybe the date that the test occurred, or maybe the machine's system ID, that you can query the database of information specifically for what you're searching for. And once that query is defined, TrendTracker returns all the test results that meet that criteria, which then you can use to sort and perform your statistical analysis. And so you can use a kind of a traditional tabular, like a data table, to view your results, but there's also a variety of charts to visually evaluate your materials performance against different control limits, maybe customer or internal specifications, or other process variation statistics. And if further analysis is required, because TrendTracker has a limited offering in terms of statistics, if there is further analysis required, there are simple exporting options that allow you to send that query's results to a CSV file, to an Excel file, to allow you to do that in Minitab or Excel, wherever your third-party applications are. And once you have a query that you've created that returns the data that is exactly what you need, that you can save that query, you can reference it at any point in time. So if it takes you 15, 20 minutes, an hour to set that up, the next time that you go into Bluehill Central, it'll just be instantly available. It'll query the active data sets since you've last run that query, and you'd be good to go. So just to give you a little bit of a visual appearance as to what we are looking at, that when you open up TrendTracker, and again, we are going to be doing this in the live demo, that we see a table of results once you have defined your query's criteria. And so to look at a couple of these main elements that we're looking at on the screen that you have in the center, that this is what we call our table of records. And so you'll have a column and row based table, very, very traditional. Each of the column represents a particular test parameter. So you could have who's run the test, maybe dimensions, maybe different test results that you care about. So this is going to be presented in our table of records, that you're able to show or hide different things depending on what you care about. So if you want to do the statistics associated to every single thing that's been returned, you can look at grand statistics. If you care about sub-statistics for a particular group of data, which we're going to get into, you can enable sub-statistics. And then there's some pretty basic fundamental statistic options that you can either enable or disable. And then lastly, just on the left-hand side, we have kind of where we're navigating through the different parts of TrendTracker, where the topmost item is always going back to that table of records. And then underneath that, you can have your different charts that you create to visualize different data sets within that table. And to discuss just the kind of the charting options that are available, that at a most basic level, there's two different types. There's individual charts and there's group charts. So individual charts are essentially used to plot data associated to a specific metric or a specific test result. So for instance, modulus, break force, that once you define your query, get all of the specimens that satisfy that query, that you could use an individual chart to say, okay, here's my y-axis, that is my break force, that on the x-axis, there will be a point associated to every specimen where that, that result applies. If you want to take one additional layer of granularity to do some sorting and additional analysis to actually group the data that you're viewing in the chart, then you'd be using our group chart. So again, you're going to choose a specific metric, so say break force, but maybe I care about break force and how it is associated to the lab that the test actually ran in. So you might have a single test that produces a break force calculation or result, and you're doing that test in 3 different locations, 3 different laboratories. You want to compare and see the maybe standard deviation associated to that calculation to compare each lab, make sure everything seems comparable. And so by using a group chart, you can then sort the data by location, or you might sort it by system ID to do another type of analysis. Or maybe you say that I want to look batch by batch and look at those average values captured for break force for each batch. So the grouping gives you that additional layer of granularity, and it also opens up a number of kind of what we call subtypes of charts, and we'll be able to get into some of that in the live demo. And then depending if you're in our table or if you're in our charts, that there's a number of statistical tools. So you saw some of the statistics that were available with the table specific to charts, that you can graph the mean value, you can have and define upper and lower acceptance limits. So those are kind of ones that you specify based on your own or maybe your customers' specifications. Then there's actually what is the data doing? So what are the control limits? So that's a little bit different from acceptance limits where you are defining versus the upper and lower control limits are actually how the data is performing. Then you can just do some standard deviation visualization. You can use moving range charts. We have also process capability metrics for the capability and performance. So PP, PPK, CP, and CPK. Those are useful calculations. And then we have a set of rules. Again, they're called WECO rules, Western Electric Company rules, that are evaluating variation of a particular data set, and it will flag particular data points if they break certain rules. So if I look, and again, we're going to be doing a little bit of a live demo, but in this top right image, this is a run chart, an individual run chart, where we're just looking at our tensile strength. So every specimen is on the x-axis, and my tensile strength in megapascals is on my y-axis, and every data point is associated to a particular specimen. And that can, of course, be from multiple samples, multiple test frames, that as long as it has that tensile strength result, and it's a part of the data set that I've used to query, then it'll appear in this chart. And then a similar individual chart is maybe, say, for width. You're trying to identify the consistency and distribution associated to your dimensional width of your specimen to make sure that maybe the preparation of that particular test sample is appropriate. So you could use histograms to understand and visualize the distribution associated to that type of measurement. And then in the middle is a box plot that shows an example of a group chart where you can look at tensile strength associated to maybe a particular test lab location. So all of this we'll be able to get into a little bit more with the demo. But how does this work? How does TrendTracker get from A to B? So A being I'm in front of an Instron frame, I'm using the testing software, I break a specimen and I finish that sample. How does it get to a point where I'm actually able to view and query that data in TrendTracker? that the first kind of a three-step process that we're going to look at is that the results, number one, that they are exported from Bluehill Universal. And so when I say results, I mean the calculations that Bluehill Universal uses, such as break force, modulus calculations, yield calculations, any custom user calculations you might require, that those results, in addition to all of the specimen and method parameters, like what your specimen labels are, your dimensions, if you have batch IDs or batch dates, that all of those things are sent to the database from any Bluehill Universal license that has our TrendTracker plugin. So we call it a plugin, but it basically is that add-on that allows us to send results to TrendTracker. And that can be on a single system, it can be on multiple systems. And that data is exported to a database. And so we use Microsoft SQL Server or Microsoft SQL Server license to store your data in that central location. And there's a couple different options depending on your infrastructure, what you currently use in your organization or what your preferences are, that at least from an Instron preference, that we would prefer the use of existing SQL Server licenses. And that preference is strictly due to performance and scalability. That if you already have a SQL Server license, that you can use that, create a new database, and point your TrendTracker data to that existing server. But if that's not something that you have in place, that we do also have an Instron supplied SQL Server Express license that our team can provide upon the purchase and help you install. And that the reason why that's not necessarily preferred is just due to, again, inferior scalability. So that SQL Server Express is a free product that Microsoft offers. It's limited in terms of its storage capacity. It's limited to 10 gigabytes. So if we're talking about connecting quite a few systems and we're having potentially quite a few people querying data and a lot of data being stored, that we're going to point you towards the full SQL Server option. So once the data is stored, then we view it in Bluehill Central's TrendTracker module. So Bluehill Central is depending on what your interests are and what you are looking to use, that you would make sure that you have the TrendTracker module as a part of that purchase. And if you have our plugins in Universal, you're not paying for it here, paying for it there. It's simply paid for with the plugin for each system, and then you just unlock this for free if you have those plugins. But fundamentally, how does this all communicate? That these different devices, whether we're looking at our Instron systems running Bluehill Universal, sending data to the database, or the database itself sitting on a server or some sort of data center that could be managed by your IT team. And then the actual Bluehill Central viewers themselves, as you're viewing this data, that they have to have access to the same network. And that is how they are communicating with each other. And that can be done in a variety of different configurations based on your own preferences. It could all be connected via Ethernet. You could have wireless network connectors. If you are at home and you have access to like a secure VPN, that you can certainly use Bluehill Central and the TrendTracker module from home via VPN. You can even do local configurations on a single PC if you're not concerned about having this remote access and you really want to still continue to do everything from your Instron frame itself, that you could install everything on the Instron PC. So there's a variety of different configurations, but at the end of the day, they need to have access to the same network for this communication to occur. So we learned a little bit about the product itself, right? So we know kind of what its basic functionality is, how it works, but really why are people using TrendTracker? What is the value that they see in TrendTracker? And that is kind of most easily described if we think about a traditional existing workflow for data analysis. So with an Instron system that you have a lot of testing occurring, you have a lot of files generated, you have a lot of results that you have to manage. And when you want it to perform an analysis, you got to do a few different things. So first you have to find those samples. So you might be searching through local files on the Instron PC, or maybe you save them to some sort of network location, network drive, and you're searching for these samples. And whether that be the Bluehill file itself or the export files from a PDF report or maybe an Excel or CSV file that contains the data itself, depending on how you export that from your method. So you got to find all of that, and you have to find that for every for every sample or batch that you're testing. So once you've found all of that, you need to find some way of merging all of that data together. So copy and pasting data from one spreadsheet to another, being able to compare the two data sets. But that ultimately allows you, once you've merged the data, to create your statistics, whether you're doing it numerically or doing it in chart form, to analyze your process and the performance of the material or products that you're testing. And then ultimately you're sharing that out, right? So that's kind of the traditional workflow, you could say, and necessary steps, but there's a lot of time associated to finding and merging the data. And that's really what we're targeting here with this solution with TrendTracker, that the time associated to finding your sample files, merging the data, just so you can finally get to doing the analysis, it can take hours every single time that you need to perform this. And so this is something that you do weekly, monthly, that it is a different time suck. So with TrendTracker in place, all of those first two time-intensive steps are done automatically. You don't have to worry about it. The test results are automatically sent to a database, and you have queries and searches that are pre-configured that you can instantly access. So you can essentially finish your analysis in the time that it used to just take to find that data. And so that time savings allows you ultimately, like, what are we trying to do? Of course, saving the time throughout your day is important, but being able to identify that if there is a problem, finding an outlier, that the result of your analysis is, hey, what happened with this batch? We've been shipping that material for 4 hours already, or for 2 weeks already, and we didn't understand that there was a significant outlier in this batch, that there are downstream implications to essentially not finding certain outliers. So the sooner that you can identify the problem, of course, the more you'll limit the downstream impact. Okay, so we can get into a demo, and for the demo today, I'm going to do a couple different things. I'm going to show, number one, how we send results to the database. So that's going to be this automatic export that you configure in a Bluehill test method. There's also a batch export that I'll get into. And then once it's in the database, I'll open up TrendTracker, and we're going to just show some of the typical functionality of you defining your search criteria, maybe grouping different fields to sort that data table. We'll create a couple of different charts, and we'll display some of the process control statistics. So I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint, and I'm going to start in Bluehill Universal. So this is Bluehill Universal. This green border is because I'm in demonstration mode. So our 34 and 6800 systems, that we have different states. So that if you're not familiar with this green border, that's why it's here. That on the normal usage of the system, you'd see like a setup mode or a testing state, depending on if a test is running or if you're just setting up a test, you'll have different colors on this border. But I'm in demonstration mode today, so it's going to remain green throughout. But for me, all I want to do is to show you where we tell our method that I want to send these results to TrendTracker. And it is configured method by method, so it's not that every single test that you run on that frame is going to go to the database, that you have to configure the method to do so. So when you are setting up our method, that if you go into the exports area, exports menu of the method itself, that there is a TrendTracker section. And so if we go to there, that by default, it's not going to be turned on. But if you want this method to send data to the database, you want to just turn that on, select the connection name. So that allows you to send data to different databases if you want to manage your TrendTracker data on different databases. And then you're going to tell it what should I send. So you can send stuff from just results table 1. You can send stuff from results table 2 as well. And then the method parameters that I talked about, you can optionally add or remove. So that's when this is turned on and your operators are running tests. So right now I'm in a prompted test or a workflow. So it's telling me to do things to enter certain values before I start this test. But pretend I ran a number of samples and I was ready to finish, that when I press this finish flag, that is going to automatically send everything that I've told it to send to the database. So very little interaction from the operator standpoint, nothing additional that they need to consider. But your methods themselves need to be set up to send that data. And the batch export I want to show you is in our settings. So in our admin module, that if you have the TrendTracker plugin, you will see this TrendTracker menu. So if I go to the TrendTracker menu, that I can manage the different connections that I have. And because I'm connected to Bluehill Central, that these settings would actually be able to be configured remotely and in one place in Bluehill Central. But I only have one connection going to a single database set up today. But the batch export is very valuable. So yes, day to day, I'm running tests. My results are going to the database, but up front, you're not going to have all of that data. So if you're new to TrendTracker and you have 5 years of test data and that you've been using on Bluehill 3, Bluehill 2, all of these sample files, that you can simply point this little wizard to that folder location, and you can export all of those results instantly to the TrendTracker database to allow you to instantly start analyzing different historical data of your test results. So that's a very useful function that is worth talking about. So if I come out of Bluehill Universal, now, like I said, I want to show you how we view things in Bluehill Central. So now I am in our Bluehill Central viewer. So if you could imagine when I was in Universal, I would be running those tests in front of an Instron frame, but now maybe I'm sitting at my desk and performing some analysis in a more comfortable setting away from the system. And I have a number of different modules that I'll get into with the Bluehill Central overview, but today I am just going to be going into TrendTracker. And so when I go into the TrendTracker module, similar to how when you are about to run a test on your Instron frame, you're selecting a method, that when I go into TrendTracker, I'm selecting a search template. So that pre-configured saved search template that queries exactly what you are looking for. So when you open up that search template, it's going to talk to the database, grab all of the most current, latest information, latest tests that have been run, and display them. And so I have this demo search template that I haven't really done too much work in, and that's what I'm going to try to do now. And so what I'm going to start by doing is first showing that this is the search criteria on the top, where right now the query is based on the last test date. So it's saying everything before today. So basically grab every single data, every single piece of data before today. So probably not granular enough to do any sort of analysis. And so for this demo, I'm going to say that I want to add another criteria, and you can add as many as you want, but I'll add a second one, and that is going to be everything associated to a particular method. So I'll say that if I really want to look at this plastics demo, so I'm going to say that anything with a method that has plastics as it's starting is what I want to look at today. And so it was 179. So again, probably very, very fresh data set, only 179, but I just added the second criteria, and now I'm down to 150 results. And this is a good data set that I've kind of set up for demoing purposes. But again, so this is just a list of these 150 results, and every single row is a specific specimen that was tested. And that could be from one sample, it could be from 20 different samples, it could be from one system, or it could be from many systems, but anything that satisfies these criteria I'm looking at here. But again, width and thickness, not very useful. So let's add some more parameters to look at. So I'm going to edit some columns, and I want to add maybe the location that the test occurred. I want to add the operator who ran the test, and maybe I want the ultimate tensile strength as well. And I know that everything from this query is that method, so maybe I don't need that. And so I'll organize it a little bit more sensibly and press OK. So now I go back to the table, and now I see kind of the location. So I have Mexico City as one location. I can see the operators. I have my width and thickness, and I have that one test result that I really care about for this search. But now let's get to trying to sort some of the data. So maybe I really want to know, I'm trying to compare each location. And so what I can do is I can grab the column header, and I can drag it into this upper row that says to drag it here to group by that column. So if I do that, now all of a sudden, I have 50 test records from Indonesia, 50 from Phoenix, and 50 from Mexico. And if I expand each of those, I get the data associated to those. But again, I can see these statistics at the bottom, but what does that really mean? That we have this little panel over here that helps you enable and disable different things that you're viewing on the table. And so right now I have my grand statistics shown at the bottom. I only have mean and standard deviation. I could add or remove ones as needed, but maybe I only care about mean and standard deviation. But again, I'm looking at the locations. I'm trying to compare these. So let's enable the sub statistics. And maybe I don't care about the grand statistics at this point. So now I can see the mean and standard deviation for any of the values that have units associated to them. And so immediately I can see for tensile strength that my mean values are quite different. But maybe for this demonstration, I really want to focus on the deviation. So Indonesia, Jakarta looks great. The Phoenix site is quite high, so that's something that I really am probably going to want to look into as to what's causing this very high standard deviation. And Mexico City as well is pretty high. And so there's a number of ways you can do this kind of analysis to troubleshoot what potentially could have caused this blip in standard deviation. And you could stay in our table, and you could just open up and look at every single specimen that was run if you wanted to. And you could sort by a particular column. And right away, you can see that there's a value that is very different from the rest, that there's a 0.75 megapascal tensile strength that is likely causing this increased standard deviation. And you can evaluate different parameters that might have resulted in that. And it's very clear that potentially this operator, Jacob, that he might have missed a decimal place or two. And this was likely supposed to be a thickness of 3.36, not 336 millimeters. And so that is something that you could go back into that sample, enter the approximate value that it should have been, and refinish it, and it would update this tensile strength. So you could go into the sample, do that, or you could just say, hey, Jacob, make sure you're a little bit more careful. We understand that at least this isn't a true outlier. It was just a manual error. But at the end of the day, you're a little bit more, you're certainly much more comfortable and confident that your material is still being produced well. So that's kind of in table form. But if you want to add a chart to do this visually, that you can create a new chart, and you can create multiple charts if you want to. And you would be, again, selecting your ultimate tensile strength as the metric that you care about. And it defaults to this individual chart, but there's also the group chart option. And you can see every specimen where there is a ultimate tensile strength. So immediately those two data, this data point that was captured by Jacob because of his incorrect method, incorrect width measurement, is shown very clearly here. But if I look at the other options available for individual charts, that you have all of these different statistical options. So you can graph the mean value, like I said. You can define acceptance criteria. So maybe I'm going to say that the upper limit is 200 and the lower limit is 100 megapascals. And so now I see those specification limits. If you want to see how well your process is achieving those limits, we have the PPK and CPK metrics. If you want to see the upper and lower control limits, if that falls within your specification limits, you can add those. Our standard deviation lines you can show. So let me maybe disable some of these so it's easier to see, but you can do plus or minus 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations. And you can enable moving charts. So sorry, moving range charts. So on the bottom, when you enable that, we have the range from one specimen to the next. And so it's just another way of monitoring the variance specimen to specimen. So those are the individual charts. But I did mention that there is group charting capability. So if I choose a group chart and I select that I want to group by location, because that is what I was referring to, that there's a number of different subtypes. So this default one is my mean or X bar chart associated to each group. There's also a range or R chart, a standard deviation or S chart. You can do combinations of both to view both at the same time. And then you can do box plots and histograms. So kind of a good representation here is if I use the box plot to show that the Indonesia site for tensile strength is a real tight grouping. You see the average value, and then kind of the two tails are associated to the range of the values that are producing that mean value. And you can see that the Phoenix and Mexico City locations certainly have some sort of outlier that we would need to look into. So that is the charting, a lot of the charting capabilities. If you need to do further analysis, that the export options are in the bottom right here, the bottom right-hand corner. So if you're sending it to CSV, I can simply click that button, say that I'm just doing some test data, save it, and so it's successfully sent. I can open up that file immediately if I want to, and that CSV file is defaulted to open up in Excel, so I can see everything, the tables, the columns and rows that were in that table. And then the benefit of going to Excel, which is the other option, so it goes into an XML spreadsheet that is opened up in Excel, that you actually retain the formula, some of the formulas that are used. So if I open up the Excel file, that not only do I have this kind of fixed column header that's automatically generated, but if I look at those calculations that, this is the statistics that I chose, that's actually using Excel's innate formulas. So a couple of different options for exporting, definitely very useful. But that's really all I wanted to show in terms of how you define your search criteria, how you can view things in the table, how you create new charts, and the different charting options. And really what I can do is show you that if I save this, sure, I want to save it as my demo search template, that I can jump out of that, and the next time, maybe the next day, the next week, the next month, I can go into TrendTracker, or anyone else that has access to Bluehill Central can use this very same search template because it is stored centrally on our central database, that I can just go right back into my my database and search the data that I just found. So I'm not actually sure why that didn't function. I think if I come back out, but historically, that is exactly how the software works, is that you save those search templates. Anyone can access them once you save them to the Bluehill Central server, and easy enough, open them up for future use. All right, so then just in closing, like I had mentioned, I wanted to just introduce our the offering of Bluehill Central in a little bit more of a broad sense. And so really Bluehill Central, everything that we just did in TrendTracker, again, TrendTracker is just a module that is now hosted inside Bluehill Central. And Bluehill Central is a lab management tool that enables the centralized management of multiple Instron test systems. So it really allows you to remotely manage your Bluehill Universal users, their permissions, your test results, any method templates, or any other Bluehill method files. That Central can also control the approval process of those Bluehill files, their revisions. You can use and configure different electronic signature requirements to drive those approvals. And in the background, we're continuously capturing who is doing what, when they did it, in this secure and searchable audit trail. So if I look at this diagram, that traditionally we're operating with inside the laboratory, we have a number of Instron frames, and they're really not necessarily talking to each other. You can't view things remotely that are occurring and set up different settings in a remote setting. But when we've connected these to Bluehill Central, the test methods are getting taken from the centralized server. The very latest settings are all being taken centrally and absorbed or kind of received by each test system. All of the test data is getting sent back to that same database. And so once it's stored centrally, when you're in your office, that is kind of where we are using. That's the main use case for Bluehill Central, is from, you could say, from the comfort of your office, that we are logging in, performing those TrendTracker actions like we looked at today, and doing other functions depending on what you've purchased. So from things that I described today, so managing those test results, doing that analysis, that's performed in our TrendTracker module, that you also get the ability to centrally manage your Bluehill users and their permissions, and that's done in settings. And that is something that now we can do centrally because we're using our Bluehill Central application. So any of your Instron testing frames, rather than locally managing the users and security that you've set up, that you can just simply do this remotely in one location. And that's a new function that's accessible by our TrendTracker users as we now are hosting it in Bluehill Central. But if we look at the other items, such as the Bluehill method file storage and other Bluehill files, like different results, CSV files, PDFs that you're generating, the centralized storage of those, their file approval process and electronic signatures, settings associated to making a method change, or if you need someone to approve test results as they're being generated. And then the audit trail associated to everything that's happening on your Instron frames and the settings that are changing and who is logging in, who's running tests, who's changing methods. All of those actions are being captured in the audit trail. That functionality is provided in the lab management and traceability modules, which are sold together. But that would be, it's not included with TrendTracker. So when you're evaluating this solution, you just wanted to understand that there's the traceability and lab management option, and then the TrendTracker option. So you can have one, the other, or both. And so that's really all I wanted to cover today. So we have 15 minutes or so for questions, and I see in the questions panel that we have a number of questions that have come in. I do want to start with a couple of the registration questions that came in first, because I was able to capture those ahead of time. So I am going to get into that at this point in time. So the first question that we got from registration is that I have a TrendTracker viewer now. So that they're probably referring to, they have what is, I guess, considered the legacy TrendTracker viewer. So they've purchased it before today. And will I need to buy Bluehill Central to continue using TrendTracker? So the answer to that is no, that if you have your TrendTracker plugins in your Bluehill software and you have your viewers that you're actively using, that there's no need to purchase Bluehill Central. You don't need to purchase the new viewer. You can use exactly what you're using. If you want new viewers, that you would be purchasing it within Bluehill Central. So that would be all new viewers would be viewed in what you've seen today. If you get a new system and you're buying software for that system, that you'd be buying the very same plugin that you always do, and you could continue to view it in your old viewer. Another question is, can you export raw data? So that's something that I did try to bring up in the webinar, but can you export raw force data, I guess they specifically mentioned, into TrendTracker? And so the answer there is no, that our raw data, so force versus displacement or anything that's generating a curve, that's not the type of data that's sent to TrendTracker. Again, we're limited to the test results and all the specimen and method parameters, and that's what we're using to do the analysis. We're not looking at raw data points. Another question is, does TrendTracker have a plotting function that can overlay? So that's actually related kind of to what I just mentioned. So sorry, let me say the full question. Does TrendTracker have a plotting function that can overlay plots of test data from different test files? So again, in TrendTracker, we're not viewing test curves, and we're not viewing raw data. We're not overlaying things. So that capability is not what TrendTracker is designed for. That actually has been a common request though, and it is on our feature backlog for Bluehill Universal for our testing software to have reference curves. So that is good to know that more and more people are asking for that capability. So that helps us know what we want to put into the product down the road. So thank you for that. Another question is that they're interested in the audit trail capabilities. So that's a very good question. That I mentioned that in Bluehill Central, we have these different modules, that when you have the traceability module, you have this audit trail. It's capturing all of these different system actions that at this point in time, that we are not capturing data that's getting transferred into TrendTracker, or really anything associated to the use of TrendTracker, that all of the traceability, and there is a document that I would point you to our website that talks about our implementation of the audit trail for traceability, and it goes into specific itemized list of what we do and do not capture. But for traceability in a broad sense, that we're looking at every change or modification of a particular Bluehill file, so test reports, test samples, test methods, report templates, all of the signatures and approvals that are occurring are tracked. All of the user permissions and user creation changes and user management is all being tracked to make sure we understand who has what capabilities, who's logging in and out of the software, who's creating test results. Those are the things that we're capturing the audit trail at this point in time. Again, down the road, I think it would make sense for us to add that capability to track everything that might be happening in TrendTracker, but right now that's not an offering. Okay, now live. Those were some of the registration questions. Now I'm going to look at some of the live questions. All right, first one is what equipment? So that's a good question. Can we connect TrendTracker to other equipment besides the Instron to get the data all associated to that sample? So another good question, but the answer to that is no, that the equipment that can send data to our TrendTracker database is our Instron equipment, and our Instron equipment that has our TrendTracker plugin capability to communicate with that specific database. So again, that is an item that we've heard in the past, but if you want to send all of your data associated to that sample from different test equipment, not just Instron equipment, that's when you'd be looking at kind of a LIMS situation where we have all of your test equipment getting pushed to a database to use a kind of a third-party application that Instron hasn't developed. Can you combine multiple tests for analysis by a common factor like a batch number? Yes, so hopefully you saw that in the demonstration that you can very easily sort by batch number to look at specific statistics associated to your sample. So that is a definite yes. Can you add acceptance criteria where there's only an upper or lower? That's a good question. Let's quickly look. You can still see my screen. If I go to all test results before today, find the data. Sorry for being brief, very quick here, but I just want to get the answer to the question. That I can do ultimate tensile strength. That's good. And I want to add a chart to look at my ultimate tensile strength. And I only want, this is the lower, so if I only want to do an upper limit, I guess we have to maybe get into specifics here. So I could talk to this person offline, but when you do enable upper and lower, it does show both. It defaults them to both 0. So it is showing my lower limit as 0. These are the acceptance limits. So if we're referring to just the control limits to understand the actual performance of the data, not just my specification line, that you can enable just one or just the other. So hopefully that answers that question. We have 5 minutes left. I see questions are coming in. Again, I'm probably not going to get to all of these. So I can certainly, I'm going to be capturing these and responding to them after we close. But let's keep going as time allows. Can I use TrendTracker for the lab inventory? I guess that depends on what you mean by lab inventory. So it's not necessarily for tracking other devices in your lab, but anything, it really is specific to the test results that you're producing from your Instron system. So at the end of the day, we're looking at a row that's associated to one specimen that was tested, and that the columns that you're using to perform your analysis are all associated to the parameters that are associated to it, or any results that you've set up. So if some of those method parameters had anything to do with other equipment that was used in the preparation of that sample, and that's in some way, shape, or form part of your lab inventory, then maybe tangentially that would make sense. But I think that's not necessarily the use case for that for TrendTracker. Can you build a export report format for TrendTracker analysis? So there is no report template that is defined. That we would at this point in time rely on a couple different things. Number one, those exporting options that I showed you. Number two is the ability, when you look at a chart, if it's something that you do care about, you can, just like you can export the data of the table, you can export your chart. So you can save it, you can copy it, print it out, that you could simply copy this and send it off. But there's not a formal reporting mechanism that organizes everything. But again, that's a great feature request that we can use to enhance the product in the future. The next one is, can I do mean plus or minus 6 standard deviations? Unfortunately, we are limited to 1, 2, and 3. So 6 is not an offering at this time. But like I've been saying, all of these features, they're very good to hear, and they're useful for me to capture and put on our backlog. Another question is, how secure is the SQL server protecting proprietary information? So really the management of the SQL database is typically kind of always behind the firewall. It's nothing that Instron can look at. This is entirely managed by either your lab or your IT team. It's sitting, again, like I said, behind the firewall in a secured data center. So from a security standpoint, it is secure, but it is also of the responsibility of your IT team to put it in the correct location per se, and have the correct security considerations. Can you make settings? Can you make the settings so that you save to SQL only? So I'm not entirely sure what that question is asking. You can, when you produce a test result in Bluehill Universal, you can disable the report, any file, as CSV files. You can say, I don't want to have any of that, and all I want to do is automatically send it to TrendTracker. So if that's the case, yes, you can set your method up to only save to the SQL database and not produce PDF files and everything that you might have done in the past. Is Bluehill Central 21 CFR certified? Yes, so that is exactly what it is used for from the compliance point of view, for traceability and lab management, that it enables your labs to be 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, that it enables you to track what you need to track, set up the approvals that you require, and be able to prove it in that audit trail for when you need to do that. So it does enable you, and it was designed specifically for 21 CFR in mind. Like I said, if you go to our website, and I'll close on this, that is an actual white paper that we've written of how we've addressed the different sections of 21 CFR Part 11. within the traceability module for Bluehill Central. But we are out of time, so I'm going to hand it back over to Nick. Thank you for listening to me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your days, and I'll make sure to get to the rest of those questions.
All right, thanks, Dan. Before we wrap things up, I have a couple of quick notes. First, for those questions not addressed live today, again, I'll make sure Dan gets copies of all those so we can follow up with you. I'm also going to be emailing each of you a copy of today's recording along with the slide deck. And then the last thing I want to mention is that we do have some additional live events just like this happening over the next few weeks. So on May 26th, which is right around the corner, one of our applications engineers will be hosting a YouTube live session discussing Slack correction versus preload. And then on June 8th, we'll also be hosting a session on retrofitting and modernizing legacy testing equipment. I've already dropped a link into the chat for our webinar page where you can find more details on those sessions. So with that said, I just want to say thanks again to Dan for presenting today, and a special thanks to all of you for attending. Really appreciate you joining us and hope to see you again next time. Enjoy the rest of your day.